to this collective action. And we find that these 7 rules are very powerful in explaining the success of these agriculture cooperatives. And so we don't have time. If anyone's interested afterwards, I'd be happy to go over them for you. A third lesson: the macro environment and the consequent institutions matter. This is really important, and we could do many levels. Clement here would be very good at explaining to you the many levels. I will start with just one. Whether you are a civil law or a common law country. And civil law countries generally are less flexible in their laws regarding organizational incorporation. And where we saw the cooperatives that worked the best earliest, not later, but earliest, were common law countries. Very, very interesting. Again, for those of you interested in law, this is an interesting observation. The fourth lesson or observation we're making is this little diagram is based on interviews with 1,000 in 30 countries, 1,000 of these agriculture cooperatives. And if you notice on the y-axis, it says health of cooperative. It doesn't say return on investment or price paid for coffee. It's the health of a cooperative determined by its members. And that varies considerably. And it's that membership. If you go back to Elinor Ostrom's design principles, the first 3 principles say those involved have to organize it, and they have to set the rules. What rules? What do I receive from the organization? What do I have to contribute? And so what we find is I run an institute, and each year we test when they walk in. These are 65 to 100 vice presidents of Land O'Lakes or Ocean Spray or of Amul from India. These type of co-ops, we say, how do you measure success? We now have 83 different responses. That's why probably our gentleman from Cargill enjoys working for Cargill. They have 1 or 2 measures of success. And in a cooperative, it varies. Now, if you take a look at the x-axis here, this is time. This framework, again, we don't have time. This is the slide that takes 45 hours. Okay, and I just want to share with you what we're doing is developing an empirical database where we can guesstimate and then estimate the shape of this curve and how large, what happens, why do we start to see what in management terms would be called degeneration. And so this is the area I'm doing research in now, and it's, for me, very exciting, so I'll change. A fifth hypothesis is we have found, this is amazing, in Europe, in Australasia, not in Australia, but in New Zealand. This is very interesting. In South Africa, even in Argentina and Uruguay, we find that these cooperatives go through a life cycle and they start to regenerate. They tinker, and I don't know, I apologize, I don't know the word for that in Spanish. They make small changes to their bylaws, and they satisfy those in conflict. Or they reinvent, or they spawn. It's one of these, those that have survived choose one of those 3 options. The others decide to exit. It doesn't mean they go bankrupt. It means they exit the organizational form and switch to another form, most likely a capital-driven firm, an investor-driven firm. By the way, this is very similar with family firms. By the time you get to the third and fourth generation, tremendous pressures. The organization starts losing its original purpose. And there are many, many participants now, and the only thing that will hold them together, homogeneity, is return on capital. And that's a very homogenizing phenomena. And that's what we see with a number of cooperatives. Here we see regeneration. A thing you might notice here is each life cycle gets shorter and shorter. This is again, this is empirical. This is a hypothesis that we're now collecting data on. This is lesson or observation 6. In addition to those rules we saw from Ostrom, we have been sifting and narrowing characteristics that lead to success. And if you take the opposite of this, they lead to failure. So bottom-up matters. If 10 of us get together and we organize, what we're finding is it has a higher probability of success than if someone tells us to work together. And many, many cooperative movements in developing countries, the developing world, are top-down. And they're massive failures. Okay? Singleness of purpose. It doesn't mean singleness of product or input. It means purpose. If you're with a commodity that is spread across a very large territory, then single commodity cooperatives, de leche, or almonds, or cranberries, work best. But if geography is what keeps you going, high degrees of social capital, then multi-purpose cooperatives work best. This is an interesting, and this is a very interesting area to study. Skin in the game matters. Skin in the game means I don't care what. You have to contribute. You have to put money in, hours worked. You cannot receive anything free. If you do, they don't last. Social capital matters, and size matters. The size matters, the hypothesis to be tested here, but we've observed it anecdotally, is the smaller the better at the beginning. It's interesting. Collective decision-making costs and risk-bearing costs are greater threat to cooperative regeneration than agency costs. This is just for the economist in here, but this is a very powerful observation. Very powerful, and those of you interested, I would be happy to discuss. Regeneration, that means that second life cycle is more successful in adaptive than in flexible organizational arrangements. Okay? What that means is these choices, tinker, reinvent, and spawn, are more easily arrived at. And phase 5 is arrived at quicker if you're in a flexible organization.